What if I told you that in 1967, Pontiac engineers built a street engine so aggressive that insurance companies refused to believe the horsepower numbers? An engine that made Chevrolet's legendary small blocks look underpowered and sent Ford scrambling back to their drawing boards. This is the story of how Pontiac's 400 cubic inch Ram Air V8 became the most underrated street terror of the muscle car era, dominating drag strips while hiding its true power behind conservative factory ratings that fooled everyone, including the competition. Picture this. It's a humid Saturday night in Detroit, summer of 1968. A pristine GTO with subtle Ram Air badges idles at a red light next to a big block Chevelle. The Chevy driver smirks, confident his 396 will destroy what he assumes is just another small block Pontiac. The light turns green. By the time the Chevelle driver realizes his mistake, he's already staring at the GTO's taillights disappearing into the night. What just happened? He got schooled by an engine that officially made the same power as his, but in reality was playing in an entirely different league. The Pontiac 400 Ram Air wasn't just another big block pretender. It was a masterclass in breathing, engineering, and corporate gamesmanship that rewrote the rules of street performance. Between 1967 and 1969, Pontiac built 96,000 of these engines, and every single one was a giant killer wrapped in conservative clothing. But to understand how this engine shocked the automotive world, we need to travel back to the mid-1960s, when Pontiac was desperately trying to shed its image as GM's stodgy division for retirees. By 1965, the muscle car wars were reaching fever pitch. Ford had their 427, Chrysler was dominating with the 426 Hemi, and Chevrolet's 396 was becoming the street racing benchmark. Pontiac had already tasted success with their 389 Tri-Power, but they needed something more, something that could run with the big dogs without the complexity of triple carburetors or the insurance penalties of massive displacement. Enter John DeLorean, Pontiac's chief engineer, and his team of mad scientists who understood something the competition had missed. You didn't need the biggest engine to make the most power. You needed the smartest one. The foundation of the Ram Air 400 started with Pontiac's existing 400 cubic inch block, itself an evolution of their successful 389. But here's where things got interesting. While everyone else was obsessed with cubic inches, Pontiac's engineers focused on something more subtle: airflow. They understood that an engine is essentially an air pump, and the more air you could move through it, the more power you could make. The stroke measured 3.75 inches, while the bore came in at 4.12 inches, creating an over-square design that favored high RPM breathing. But the real magic wasn't in the basic architecture, it was in what Pontiac did with the air once it entered the engine. The Ram Air system was revolutionary for a production car. Two functional hood scoops fed cold, dense air directly to a sealed air cleaner housing that sat atop a Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor. When you mashed the throttle, spring-loaded doors in the hood, scoops opened, ramming cold air into the engine at speeds up to 100 mph. Cold air is denser than hot underhood air, about 1% more power for every 10-degree temperature drop. At highway speeds, the Ram Air system could drop intake temperatures by 50 degrees compared to a conventional setup. Do the math, and you're looking at a 5% power increase just from temperature differential. But that was only the beginning. The cylinder heads were where Pontiac's engineering really shone. These weren't just big port heads. They were specifically designed for maximum flow velocity. The intake ports featured a unique D-shape that maintained airspeed while maximizing volume. Port volume measured 2.11 inches at the intake and 1.77 inches at the exhaust. The intake valves measured 2.11 inches in diameter, while the exhausts came in at 1.77 inches. These might not sound like huge numbers compared to big block Chevys with 2.19-inch intakes, but Pontiac's engineers knew that bigger wasn't always better. Port velocity was the key to torque, and torque was what won street races. The combustion chambers were wedge-shaped and measured 72 cc, creating a compression ratio of 10.75.1 with flat-top pistons. This was about as much compression as you could run on pump gas, even the good stuff available in the late 1960s. The chamber design promoted excellent flame propagation and resisted detonation even under extreme conditions. The valve angles were set at 14 degrees for the intake and 12 degrees for the exhaust, optimizing flow while maintaining proper valve-to-piston clearance. Inside the block, Pontiac didn't cut corners. The rotating assembly featured forged steel connecting rods measuring 6.625 inches center to center. These rods could handle 7,000 RPM pulls all day long without breaking a sweat. The crankshaft was a nodular iron unit for standard Ram Air engines, though the Ram Air 4 got a forged steel piece. The pistons were cast aluminum with steel inserts for the top ringlands, preventing ring groove wear under high RPM operation. The wrist pins were full floating, retained by spiral locks that wouldn't come loose under extreme conditions. The camshaft was where things got really aggressive for a street engine. The Ram Air 3 cam featured 273 degrees of intake duration and 289 degrees on the exhaust, measured at 0.050-inch lift. Total valve lift came in at 0.410 inches on the intake and 0.413 on the exhaust. For comparison, a typical street performance cam of the era might have 260 degrees of duration. This cam gave the Ram Air its characteristic lope at idle and its ability to keep making power well past 5,500 RPM. The valve springs were dual units with dampers, capable of controlling valve float up to 6,500 RPM. Now let's talk about those official horsepower ratings. Pontiac claimed the Ram Air 3 made 366 horsepower at 5,100 RPM and 445 lb-ft of torque at 3,600 RPM. The Ram Air 4 was rated at 370 horsepower at 5,500 RPM and 405 lb-ft at 3,900 RPM. These numbers were pure fiction, and everyone in the know understood the game. Independent dyno testing consistently showed the Ram Air 3 making 380-390 horsepower, and the Ram Air 4 pushing past 410. Why the deception? Insurance companies. By keeping the official ratings conservative, Pontiac helped their customers avoid the crushing insurance premiums that came with 400-plus horsepower ratings. The induction system itself was a marvel of simplicity and effectiveness. The hood scoops weren't just decorative. They were fully functional ram tubes that created positive pressure in the air cleaner at speed. Pontiac engineers calculated that at 100 mm price, the ram effect alone was worth 15 horsepower. But more importantly, the cold air meant consistent performance. While other engines would lose power as underhood temperatures soared, the Ram Air maintained its performance run after run. Drag racers quickly learned that a Ram Air Pontiac would run the same elapsed time on its 10th pass as it did on its first. The exhaust system was equally well thought out. The cast iron exhaust manifolds weren't headers, but they were designed for maximum flow within packaging constraints. The outlets measured 2.25 inches and fed into a true dual exhaust system with minimal bends. The mufflers were straight-through designs with minimal restriction. Some Ram Air cars even came with exhaust cutouts that could be opened for track use, essentially creating an open exhaust system at the flip of a lever. But here's where it gets interesting. The Ram Air wasn't just about straight-line performance. The engine's long stroke created massive torque from idle to redline. Peak torque arrived at just 3,600 RPM, but the curve was so flat that the engine pulled like a freight train from 2,000 to 6,000 RPM. This broad power band made the Ram Air incredibly flexible on the street. You could lug it around town in high gear, Then drop the hammer and feel the secondary barrels of the Quadrajet open up, unleashing hell. The Rochester Quadrajet itself deserves recognition. While some dismissed it as a quadrabog, in reality, it was a sophisticated piece of engineering. The small primaries provided excellent throttle response and fuel economy for cruising, while the massive secondaries, flowing 750 CFM, provided all the air the Ram Air could swallow at wide-open throttle. The carburetor featured a divorced choke for quick warm-ups and an accelerator pump that could be adjusted for optimal launch performance. On the street, Ram Air-equipped GTOs and Firebirds were virtually unbeatable in stoplight-to-stoplight combat. The combination of massive torque, excellent gearing, and relatively light weight, a 68 GTO weighed about 3,500 pounds, created a package that could embarrass much more exotic machinery. Quarter-mile times tell the story. A properly driven Ram Air 3 GTO could run 13.5 seconds at 105 mph bone stock. With nothing more than traction bars, good tires, and optimal tuning, 13.2s at 107 mph were common. The Ram Air 4 cars were even quicker, dipping into the high 12s with minimal modifications. Let that sink in for a moment. In 1968, a 12-second quarter-mile was supercar territory. Ferrari Daytonas couldn't do it. Lamborghini Miuras couldn't do it. Yet here was a Pontiac you could buy from any dealer, drive to work Monday through Friday, then dominate at the drag strip on Saturday night. And it cost less than $4,000, about $31,000 in today's money. Try finding that kind of performance per dollar today. The competition took notice. Chevrolet rushed to develop their own Ram Air systems for the Camaro Z28 and SS models. Ford created the Cobra Jet 428 specifically to counter the Pontiac threat. Chrysler kept refining their street Hemi, knowing that Pontiac was catching up fast. But Pontiac had a secret weapon. Their engines were underrated in every sense of the word. While a 426 Hemi carried massive insurance penalties and a Cobra Jet Ford announced its intentions with huge hood scoops, the Ram Air Pontiac looked almost pedestrian until you lined up next to one. The Ram Air story wasn't without its challenges. The aggressive camshaft made for rough, idle quality, especially on cold mornings. The high compression ratio demanded premium fuel and lots of it. Figure 10 mpg if you kept your foot out of it. The functional hood scoops could ingest water during heavy rain, potentially hydrolocking the engine if you weren't careful. And the clutch-type limited slip differential that came with most Ram Air cars was notorious for wearing out under hard use. There were also manufacturing inconsistencies. Early Ram Air 3 engines suffered from soft camshafts that would wear prematurely. Some blocks had porosity issues that led to coolant leaks. The Rochester Quadrajet, while excellent when properly tuned, was sensitive to float-level adjustments and could stumble if not maintained correctly. But Pontiac addressed these issues quickly, and by 1969, the Ram Air was bulletproof. The human stories behind the Ram Air are just as compelling as the engineering. Jim Wangers, Pontiac's ad man and drag racing enthusiast, was instrumental in creating the GTO and pushing for more performance. Herb Adams, a young engineer who would later create the Trans Am, spent countless hours on the dyno optimizing the Ram Air's breathing. And Royal Pontiac, the Detroit dealership that became synonymous with Pontiac performance, developed the Royal Bobcat package that extracted even more power from the Ram Air with blueprint balancing and careful tuning. Then there was the Ram Air V, the engine that never was. Developed in 1969, this was essentially a tunnel port racing engine barely disguised for street use. With massive ports that actually passed through the push rods, roller camshaft, and forged everything, the Ram Air V was rated at 433 horsepower, but actually made closer to 500. Pontiac built about 200 of these engines, but none ever made it into production cars. They were too radical, too expensive, and frankly, too powerful for the street. Most ended up in drag cars, where they dominated superstock racing for years. The end came suddenly. By 1970, insurance companies had caught on to the game. They started rating premiums based on cubic inches and power-to-weight ratios rather than advertised horsepower. Emissions regulations were tightening, gas prices were rising, the muscle car party was ending, and Pontiac knew it. The 1970 Ram Air 4 would be the last of the breed, though the name would resurface later on emission-strangled engines that were shadows of their predecessors. But the engineering lessons learned from the Ram Air program lived on. The focus on airflow over displacement influenced engine design for decades. The Ram Air principle itself became standard on performance cars. Look at any modern sports car and you'll find some variation of cold air induction. The idea that breathing efficiency could trump cubic inches became gospel in the era of fuel injection and turbocharging. From a technical standpoint, the Ram Air program proved several important points. First, that induction design was indeed as important as displacement. The Ram Air 400 regularly outperformed larger engines simply because it could breathe better. Second, that cold air induction provided measurable performance benefits in the real world, not just on paper. Third, that a properly designed engine could make enormous power while still being streetable and reliable. The legacy extends beyond just performance. The Ram Air Pontiac represented a philosophy that engineers, given freedom and resources, could create something extraordinary within the constraints of mass production. Every Ram Air engine was hand-assembled at Pontiac's engine plant, with each builder signing their work. This attention to detail showed in the consistency of performance. Magazine test cars regularly matched or exceeded Pontiac's claims, unusual in an era of ringers and specially prepared press cars. Consider the broader context. In 1968, America was at war in Vietnam, cities were burning with racial unrest, and the establishment was under assault from every direction. Yet, in the middle of this chaos, American engineers were creating some of the greatest performance engines ever built. The Ram Air 400 represented optimism, technical prowess, and the belief that problems could be solved through innovation. It was democracy on wheels. Anyone with $3,800 could own a car that would humiliate European exotics, costing 10 times as much. The survivors today are treasured. A numbers-matching Ram Air GTO can fetch 6 figures at auction. Ram Air 4 cars are even more valuable, with pristine examples approaching $200,000, but the real value isn't monetary, it's historical. These engines represent the pinnacle of old-school American performance engineering, the last gasp before emissions regulations and insurance companies ended the party. Modern enthusiasts have kept the flame alive. Companies like Butler Performance and Kaufman Racing Equipment build modern versions of the Ram Air using contemporary technology. With aluminum heads, roller camshafts, and modern ring packages, these engines make 500-plus horsepower while being more streetable than the originals. It's a testament to the soundness of the basic design that it still works 50 years later. The Ram Air story also teaches us about marketing and perception. By underrating their engines, Pontiac created a mystique that persists to this day. Every Ram Air owner believes their engine makes more power than advertised, and they're right. This created brand loyalty that GM would kill for today. Pontiac owners weren't just customers. They were members of a secret society that knew the truth about their engines. The technical innovations went beyond just the induction system. Pontiac was among the first to use computer modeling for port design. They pioneered the use of flow benches to optimize head performance. They developed new casting techniques that allowed for thinner cylinder walls and more efficient cooling passages. The Ram Air program pushed manufacturing technology forward in ways that benefited all of GM's divisions. But perhaps the most important legacy is the proof that innovation doesn't require unlimited resources or exotic materials. The Ram Air was built from cast iron and steel using carburetors and distributors that seem primitive today. Yet through clever engineering and attention to detail, Pontiac created an engine that could compete with anything in the world. It's a reminder that engineering excellence is about problem solving, not just throwing money at problems. The Ram Air also represented the democratization of performance. Unlike European supercars that were toys for the ultra-wealthy, the Ram Air Pontiac was attainable for working-class Americans. A factory worker could save up and buy a GTO, and suddenly he owned something that could outrun a Ferrari. This accessibility made the Ram Air not just an engine, but a social equalizer. Today, as we transition to electric vehicles and argue about autonomous driving, it's worth remembering what the Ram Air represented. It was pure analog performance. No computers, no driver aids, just mechanical excellence and human skill. The connection between driver and machine was direct and unfiltered. When you nailed a perfect shift at 6,500 RPM and felt the Ram Air surge forward, you weren't just driving, you were conducting a mechanical symphony. The engineering philosophy behind the Ram Air, maximizing efficiency within existing constraints, is more relevant than ever. As we face climate change and resource scarcity, the ability to do more with less becomes critical. The Ram Air showed that you don't always need the biggest solution. Sometimes you need the smartest one. That lesson applies whether you're building engines or solving global challenges. So what really made the Ram Air special? It wasn't just the horsepower, though that was impressive. It wasn't just the engineering, though that was innovative. It was the complete package: performance, reliability, accessibility, and attitude. The Ram Air was unapologetically American in the best sense: bold, powerful, and democratic. It represented a time when engineers were heroes and performance was king. The Pontiac 400 Ram Air shocked everyone not because it was the biggest or the most powerful, but because it proved that smart engineering could beat brute force. It showed that breathing mattered more than displacement, that cold air was worth horsepower, and that factory ratings didn't tell the whole story. Most importantly, it proved that Pontiac, the division nobody took seriously, could build an engine that made everyone else look obsolete. In the end, the Ram Air's greatest achievement wasn't the drag strips it dominated or the street races it won. It was proving that innovation could come from unexpected places, that underdogs could become champions, and that sometimes the best engineering solution is the one that nobody sees coming. The 96,000 Ram Air engines built between 1967 and 1969 weren't just motors. They were mechanical middle fingers to the establishment, iron cast proof that Pontiac had figured out something the competition had missed. The Ram Air 400 remains a testament to what's possible when engineers are given freedom to innovate, when companies are willing to push boundaries, and when performance is the ultimate goal. It reminds us that true innovation often comes not from having the most resources, but from using what you have more intelligently than anyone else. And that's a lesson that transcends automotive history. It's a blueprint for excellence in any field. What's your favorite underdog engine story? Drop a comment below and let me know about the motors that punched above their weight class. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Pontiac's engineering masterpiece, make sure to subscribe because we're just getting started with the stories of engines that changed the world. Until next time, keep those Ram Airs breathing and those tires smoking.